Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the University of Dundee's Saturday evening lecture series. We're really delighted to be with you tonight in this virtual world which we're all inhabiting. Hopefully that will resolve itself in the coming weeks and we can go back to a more normal method of communicating with you all. But we're delighted that you've come online and to help us discuss tonight's topic, which is aging society and exploring the impact of an aging society. And we've got four of us here from the University of Dundee to discuss that. We were hoping for this to be compared by Leslie Riddick, but unfortunately she's had technical problems getting into the system. So do bear with us. I'm going to chair instead of her. So I'm sorry that's a bit of a disappointment. But we've got some wonderful people here tonight. So we've got Professor Tim Kelly, Professor Judy Six Smith, Professor Miratul Muqit, and myself. I'm Mike Ferguson, and we're going to address this very important issue about aging societies. All throughout the world, the demographics of society are changing, and mostly it's changing to a more aging society. So we end up with fewer younger people and more older people, quite simply. And of course, we have to think about what the impacts and implications for that are and what kind of society we all want to live in. So that's what we're really going to explore. And to do that, well, first of all, each of the four of us from the university are going to give a 4 or 5 minute summary of the kind of things that we do in our own research that's relevant to studying aging societies and their implications. So I'm going to invite Tim first to give us a quick introduction. So Tim Kelly.
Good evening, everyone. You know, the media talks a lot about the aging population as a problem, and I'd like to make the point that saying the aging population is a problem because it's not really a problem. Like all demographic shifts, aging populations do pose challenges that need to be addressed, but an aging population should be rejoiced because it really suggests that the society is doing something right. Aging populations happen not only because people are living longer, but also because of decreases in child mortality and lower fertility rates. And some of the benefits of decreasing child mortality and declining birth rates are that there are fewer dependents in society, women are freer to engage equally in social and economic activities, and children are raised in healthier, more prosperous families with long-term benefits from that. In developing countries, we see the birth rate fall when child mortality drops. We also then see an increase in standard of living, and then the percentage of older people to younger people increases, and there's a declining population begins to occur, which actually is good for the planet. But so many headlines catastrophize the aging population. And why is that? I think because aging, seen it as a problem, is because of an ageist view, that aging and old people are viewed as dependent, unproductive, a drain, a drag, use too many resources, or stealing resources from young people, or they've had their day in the sun, those types of attitudes. And seeing aging populations as a problem is promulgated by a concept called the dependency ratio, which really gained traction in the 1980s when aging populations became a scapegoat for welfare cuts. And this is a belief that as the population ages, societies will have fewer productive people in the workforce supporting all the dependent older people. Another reason for this belief, the aging population as a problem, is that there are fears that a declining workforce will cause economic difficulties. And then, of course, health concerns are the big thing, that healthcare will become unaffordable because of all the old sick people. So I want to unpack a few of these ideas. Just because someone is old or of retirement age doesn't mean they aren't contributing to the economy. For example, in 2016-17, people over 65 contributed 160 billion, that's with a B, 160 billion pounds to the UK economy. For example, if you look at older carers, unpaid carers, in 2016-17, older carers saved the UK economy 95 billion pounds with very limited support. And this is an area of my research about the unmet needs of carers. If we look at grandparents, they provide a lot of daycare so their children can work. And in 1617, this was nearly 8 billion pounds to the economy. And if we look at the voluntary sector, if you walk into any food bank today, chances are the volunteers will be older people. And this will be replicated across a large swathe of the charitable sector. And in 1617, this voluntary labor amounted to nearly 3 billion for the UK economy. And of course, older people continue to work past the retirement age. And again, in 1617, this was worth 54 billion pounds to the economy. And corporations are really waking up to the gray pound, and this market, older people, can drive economic growth rather than be a drain on economies. And studies do find that there's not a relationship between increasing population age and dependence in the workforce. If the workforce shrinks, terms and conditions improve, so workers are better paid, which is a good thing. But when we look at across the life course, there really is wide disparity associated with the social dimensions of health. But in general, people are living longer, but they're also living longer without disability, especially if we look at those people under 85. However, chronic illness does increase with age, and treating these illnesses can be costly, but perhaps that's an expense that's worth it for society. Rather than looking at aging per se, it's more useful to look at life expectancy ratios or the prevalence of disability rather than age, because we can lengthen healthy years and shorten ill health disability before death. So I'd like to close my comments by pointing out that older people should not be cast as a burden or a problem, but as a natural resource. Designing communities that enhance older people's abilities to contribute and maintain health, finding new drugs and better treatments for aging-related health conditions are all investments in that natural resource. And this natural resource will continue contributing to the good of society rather than be a drain. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was a great opening salvo, because I think you really set the agenda there, about how important the older generation is in terms of driving our economy and also actually framing our society in a very positive way. And I think it's really important that we hold on to that throughout the whole of this evening's discussion. I'd like to invite Judy Six Smith, to give us her introduction to her work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael, and hello everyone. I'm Judy Six Smith, and I want to talk about achieving better health and well-being for older people and populations, not just through improved health and social care services, but by intergenerational, age-friendly design of the environment and of the community context of everyday life. The growth of older populations, together with rapid urbanisation and technologisation, creates a set of conditions where health, social care and welfare costs are spiralling, service provisions are increasingly age segregated and less integrated in community life, and economic, social and digital exclusion is a continual threat to age inclusion. And in all this, as Tim argued, older people are more often seen as a burden and a challenge. But when older people are continually framed as a problem, they run the risk of being devalued in their potential contributions to family, community and employment. And this can lead to living marginalised lives in loneliness and social isolation. And as we know, loneliness and social isolation are linked to poorer mental and physical health outcomes. So according to Age UK, more than 1 million older people in England say they go for over 1 month, that's 1 month, without speaking to a friend, a neighbour or a family member, 1 month. And in Scotland, 100,000 older people feel lonely or most of the time. That's 100,000 older people. So it's clear that we need to provide better, more coherent ways of integrating older people in everyday life, so they can enjoy the opportunities afforded by local and digital communities and enjoy better health and well-being. Aging well requires accessible, meaningful opportunities in local spaces and places. So this brings me to the idea of aging in place, which has been a key driver for research policy and practiced in recent years. So Aging in Place focuses on enabling older people to live interdependently in their homes and communities for as long as possible. And that's seen as being much better than older people moving in later life, perhaps into more communal and residential settings. But Aging in Place is not the panacea that it seemed to be, especially when the home deteriorates, perhaps grows damp and in need of physical repair, finances become strained, and as communities increasingly fail to provide for older people's needs and interests, and leisure, health and social care services for older people don't always consider that their diversity and what that diversity means for inclusion in everyday life. While the World Health Organization's age-friendly movement has gone a long way towards promoting positive placemaking for older people, quite often this focuses on the more functional and measurable aspects of environments rather than those more intangible things like sense of belonging and identity that are involved in us feeling part of the place that we're in and that are critical to feeling part of community. It also often neglects to properly address digital inclusion or indeed the heterogeneity of older people. We talk about older people as if they're all the same. There's huge differences between people who are 60 or 65 and those who are in much later ages in life, in their 80s and 90s and so on. Heterogeneity in terms of gender, ethnicity and socio-economic position all needs to be taken into account if older people are to be embraced and included in social, civic and work life. And perhaps by designing for age friendliness, we run the risk of marginalising older people in pre-designed age silos. So I'm arguing for aging well, I'm arguing not for aging in place, but I'm arguing for aging well in the right place, in constructing community, physical, service and technological as well as digital spaces and places that not only accommodate the needs and interests of diverse older people, but that welcome them and include them as part and parcel of everyday life. I'm proposing that a joined up intergenerational approach to developing age-friendly services, environments and communities is needed. And this is where younger and older people across the lifespan come together as equals across professions and community boundaries to co-design and co-create inclusive, compassionate communities. We've seen this happen in COVID times, so let's build on the social connectedness that we know we can do, and that has been brought to the fore even in the midst of social distancing. So I argue that to improve the health and well-being of older people and populations, the inclusion of older people in everyday life is essential. For me, it's not just about good quality health and social care services, as important as that is. It's about taking a community-based rather than an age-based approach to what's needed. It's about really attending to digital inclusion, and more specifically, it's about co-designing and implementing intergenerational policies, services, spaces and places to reflect diversity, inclusion and identity. And ultimately, it means changing mindsets of age and burden, as Tim mentioned, by enhancing the visibility of older people in our communities and our everyday lives so that we can better enjoy the benefits of ageing societies and ensure that older people sit at the table in our efforts to rejuvenate society. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Judith. That was wonderful. So we've learned from Tim that aging society, older people are not a burden or a challenge. They're an absolute massive asset. And we've heard from Judith that when we think about how we want our society to be, we need to be totally inclusive of that age diversity and respectful of it, and build a society where everybody is mixed together and the society is designed collectively from the entire age span of society, and that we don't ghettoize old people. I think if I can paraphrase her comments. I'll spend just a few minutes telling you a little bit about my own research, which is very different in this space from Tim and Judith, because I'm a basic scientist. I'm a biochemist. I've been working at the University of Dundee for many years. And actually, most of my career has not been in aging research, but in tropical disease research, where we've studied the organisms that cause tropical diseases and then made new medicines for them and so on. But in the process of making new medicines for tropical diseases, I became more and more interested in human physiology, and also working closely with a good friend and colleague of mine at Oxford University called Chas Bountra. We decided that it'd be nice to put together a consortium of like-minded scientists who wanted to do something about the multi-morbidities of aging. So aging processes associated often with not one but several morbidities that happen together and collectively lead to frailty and ill health, basically. And we were wondering whether it was possible to do something about that. The traditional way that the pharmaceutical industry has made medicines is sort of like a single indication, single drug. And the problem with that is that by the time people are perhaps in their late 80s or early 90s, they may be on 10, 12, 15, 20 different medicines. And then, of course, some of these medicines interact with each other badly, and people can actually suffer from the medication as much as they can from the aging process. And we wanted to take a more holistic view to that, and to fold together with a set of experts in different areas, all the information we know about human genetics in the aging process, all of the information we know about pharmacology in the aging process, and all we know about the fundamental biology of the aging process, not just in human beings, but in fruit flies, in yeast, in worms, because you can learn everything from all of these different parts of biology. And ask ourselves the question, are there some fundamental biological processes that are the primary causes when they go wrong, when they're dysregulated, to the multiple morbidities of aging? In other words, if we could intervene on 2 or 3 fundamental pathways, could we basically make people's health span go much longer? Not talking about lifespan here, I'm not talking about making people live longer, talking about making them live in a healthier state for longer. Now, we know 2 of the best things you can do to live a longer and healthier life are to have a good diet and exercise. And actually, many of the biological pathways that those impinge upon are ones which we could then further tweak with pharmacological agents. So we could make some very safe medicines that would actually help people add to those beneficial effects. That's really what we're trying to do. So this consortium I work with involves Dundee, Manchester, Birmingham, Oxford, London, and now Cambridge. And we call it the UK spine because if you draw it on a map, it looks like a spine all down the United Kingdom. And I think it's really important for scientists such as ourselves to work together to try and tackle some of these very big issues that actually the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, won't tackle because aging is not seen as an illness. Indeed, it isn't. But we do need, I think, therapeutics to deal with an increasingly aging population, to make them feel well, feel active, to make it easier for them to be that great asset that Tim mentioned, for example. And so that's really what we're trying to do, and we're quite enthusiastic that we can do that. Now, many people will say you don't want to over medicalize life, and I completely agree with that. So I'll give you one sort of counterbalance, if you like, one example, which is I think most people are pretty comfortable these days with being prescribed a statin. If you go to the doctor and they measure your blood cholesterol and it's a little bit high, they give you a statin because it'll halve the chances of you having a heart attack or a stroke. It's a pretty good deal. They're very, very safe medicines. And this is what I'm talking about. Maybe there are other medicines that could give that kind of benefit in slowing down the aging process, making people live healthier, feeling better for longer, rather than not extending life, but extending health span. So I'll be quiet there because I've already droned on long enough. But that's what we're trying to do from a scientific, technological end. And this is not so dissimilar from what my colleague Miratul will talk about just now. So I'll hand over now to my friend and colleague Miratul Muqit. Miratul.
Thank you very much, Mike, and a warm welcome to everybody. And so I am a doctor and a medical researcher here at the University of Dundee. And Mike actually laid out really a vision for how to tackle this concept of improving sort of quality of life in those that are aging now longer. And the initiative he talked about was addressing the sort of the fact that as you get older, there's a liability that you may have a number of other health problems that all sort of interact. And certainly this pioneering initiative that Mike mentioned aims to understand the science behind that. But there is another aspect of the aging challenges which can sort of be reduced to more specific diseases that are characteristically in the aging population, and that's the area that my research has been involved in, and this is the impact of brain disorders, which are degenerative disorders mostly, that occur in those that really start to get over the age of into the sort of 8th, 9th, and 10th decades of their life. So the particular disease that we've been interested in Dundee has been Parkinson's disease, and the way that we try and tackle this is very similar to how researchers are also trying to understand other diseases like Alzheimer's disease and motor neuron disease. We think that at the moment these diseases, which are at the moment not treatable, I mean there are some treatments, but they're very, very limited, and certainly none of them can slow down the disease. We think the reason for that is that there's a very, very strong absence of sort of scientific knowledge about what underlies these processes. And just to give you a parallel, we at the moment don't have treatments for these diseases because of that lack of knowledge. That has not been the case for many other diseases that have been more successfully tackled by the sort of medical research and health research over the last 50 years. And specifically, most of you will be familiar with the fact that the reason why we're aging now has been terrific breakthroughs in our understanding of cardiovascular diseases. So we learn from epidemiologists the importance of smoking as being a risk factor, and other lifestyle things which can impact on that, and interventions related to that have led to a reduction in cardiovascular disease. There's also been a lot of breakthroughs in our understanding of some of the major cancers, and that has led now to many treatments which can in some cancers be curative. So we in terms of our diseases that we're interested in, have probably been more of a Cinderella research area up until, I think, in the last sort of decade. I think what's interesting about the way that research is funded, and maybe why we're also where we are with neurodegenerative diseases, is that you often see that society puts priorities on health challenges. And in some ways that can be very useful to kind of panic almost both society, agencies that fund research, and also researchers wanting to go into those areas. So some of you might remember in the 1970s this US directive to go to war on cancer, and certainly that led to vast sums of investment in cancer research, which attracted lots of researchers, the most ablest researchers in science, to work on this problem, and that has led to the treatment breakthroughs that have occurred. We can also see that society reacts very, very strongly to unexpected health challenges. For example, pandemics, and we're unfortunately in one at the moment, and you can see how society can mobilize and particularly put in large sums of investment attract the best and the brightest to work on this problem. And we've seen in the last 12 months the tremendous advances in COVID and vaccines, for example. In the case of the aging-related disorders that my lab has been interested in, we very much have been more of a Cinderella area of study. There's a smaller pool of researchers in this area. The funding, if you compare it to, for example, cancer, has not been as substantial. And that might explain why there has been this lag in understanding. But I don't want to paint a picture of doom and gloom, because I think we now, as a sort of research community, have benefited now from an impetus in trying to tackle the medical basis and management of dementia, and also diseases like Parkinson's. And we're certainly seeing now in this area very big initiatives to tackle these diseases. I want to give you one that the University of Dundee has been involved with. This has been in Parkinson's disease, where it was a few years ago. It was noticed that the funding for Parkinson's lagged behind Alzheimer's in the United States, and so an organization called Aligning Science Across Parkinson's decided to set up a global network of researchers. It was in fact a competition to select researchers that could go into understanding the basic fundamentals of Parkinson's disease. And this was an initiative with very large amounts of funding. Fortunately, here in Dundee, a team that was led by my colleague Dario Alessi, and I'm also part of this team, we're one of 21 teams in the world to receive funding to tackle Parkinson's mechanisms. I mean, what we hope is with such programs is that not only do we have the investment, but we'll also bring in talent, and we'll bring in the best young scientists who want to work on Parkinson's disease, and particularly try and make breakthroughs that can help towards diagnostic and therapeutics that we currently don't have. So if from a research point of view, Dundee now is really, I think, placed itself on the global map as a centre of excellence for Parkinson's disease. The work that we've done here in Dundee, also that's my colleague Dario. I have a number of other colleagues, at least a dozen, who are working on Parkinson's disease. And we hope that if we can come up with treatments, it comes back to what Mike mentioned, it's not just about aging, it's about improving quality of aging, reducing disability, reducing frailty. And we think we can achieve that through research in these specific disease areas that are a burden. I want to just finally finish with more of a commentary and perspective from a doctor's point of view about aging. And I do think that we are now starting to see an appreciation in the clinic that people that are older have to be looked at in a different way than younger people. Traditionally, for example, treatments for diseases have really focused on the model that trials would generally be done on younger people, and for single diseases, sort of stroke or heart disease or bronchitis, treatments that would work for younger people would probably work for older people. I think initiatives such as what Mike has pointed out, but also in the clinical sphere, there's a lot more understanding now about multi-morbidity as being critical. That is, that elderly people tend to have more likely at least two or more chronic conditions, and that they also may have other features such as chronic pain or frailty, which can impact. They often have polypharmacy. They're often on many drugs, which can be good and bad. And it's very nice now to see that my colleagues that work in the medical school are doing a number of clinical research projects on multi-morbidity. And in the clinical sphere, elderly patients now that go and see doctors who are interested in aging get what's called sort of like a comprehensive geriatric assessment, where it's not just about a single disease, but really the whole holistic sort of understanding of somebody's health needs and concerns. So I think I'll finish there, but there's still a lot of challenges still, but I think that we really turned a corner in the last decade, and I think I'm very optimistic that we'll see new treatments and better health impacts on the elderly. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you, Miratul. And just to emphasise how brilliant Miratul is, together with Dario Alessi in their Parkinson's disease research here at the University of Dundee, which is truly world leading. Okay, so we're going to go into a Q&A session now and respond to questions from the audience. So I'm going to pick them out as they come in and relay them to who I think can answer them best. So the first question I'm going to direct to Tim, actually, which is the questioner says, as a mainly female aging society, this is very relevant at the end of a week where we've been celebrating women in all aspects of society, of course. As a mainly female aging society and with social care underfunding, how does the panel predict how this will affect future generations? So would you like to address that gender bias issue in an aging society? Thank you.
Yeah, and I wish I had some good news or could have a positive spin on this, but it would be difficult to do because the gender bias continues across the life course, and so and women can be disadvantaged across the life course. So this, the gender pay gap continues into older age. That the current cohort of older women were much more likely to be in caring roles in and out of the workforce at different times. And there's this concept called the Caravan of Caring, and when a family needs caring, it's typically the wife that takes time out to care for a sick husband or sick family members, then an adult daughter, and then a daughter-in-law before it gets to sons and sons-in-law to provide the caring, and that does impact women and their financial resources as they age, and the carers are, as I was saying, they provide a huge resource to governments, but don't get much, nearly enough support in return, and so it can be a bleak picture for them. So we do need to look at how do we support women as they age, because they do age longer, live longer as well. So I don't have an answer how to fix it, but it is one of the challenges as we continue to have an increasingly aging population.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim. It's rather a bleak indictment of the inequalities across the genders there. As you mentioned, the pay gap, which extends throughout lifetime, and the fact that women seem to pick up the majority of the caring functions in society is a bit of an indictment of men as well, in which I include myself. So we'll move to a second question from Susanna, who asks, what does the panel think about older people's co-housing projects? And how can establishing a co-housing community be facilitated? That has to be a question for Judith.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the new ideas about co-housing are really interesting. I think that in Scotland in particular, we've got some pilot examples of co-housing, but just talking about co-housing, there's very many different ways to achieve that. So, for example, in Canada, there's a very, very good and very actually successful scheme where students are taken into the houses of older people, and in exchange for a lower rent, those students provide particular supports for that older person. To enable them to live independently at home for as long as possible. So that's a scheme where students in particular and older adults can agree together now how they want to live and what kind of supports they each provide to the other. evaluation of that scheme has been, I think it's called Home First. The evaluation of that scheme has shown that it's really very beneficial for both younger people and older people. But what's required is a close mediation, if you like, of or facilitation by the organising service, so that young people and old people can go somewhere to get support if it's not working out. And obviously there's the need to think about situations of abuse that could occur, and abuse within the domestic environments can be quite difficult to see in lots of cases, and if you can't see it, you can't deal with it. So I think co-housing has great opportunities for older people to support them. It's great for younger people as well, but it really needs very closely monitoring and facilitating.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you very much, Judith. Excellent reply. Obviously, a really important aspect of as you say, how we design the right solutions for intergenerational activities. And actually, on intergenerational activities, here's a very interesting question. Somebody says, last week was Intergenerational Week. I didn't know that. However, many intergenerational projects are between nursery schools and youth services and older people's care homes and so on. Do we need to focus at least as much on intergenerational work that could be carried out between the normal adult population and the older population within the community to help reduce this negative perception of an aging society? Judith, I'm going to go back to you quickly for that one, but then also bring Tim in immediately afterwards. So do you like to start off on that intergenerational one of the adult population and older people, rather than trying to always link the very young with the very old?
I couldn't agree more. We've just finished a project which was funded by the Scottish University's Insight Institute on the development of intergenerational age-friendly ecosystems. And in that project, we ran a number of workshops where different professionals, different residents from communities, and children as young as 7, and people as old as, how old was Olive? Almost 90, came along together in those workshops to think about, how do we co-design together? What do we need to do to think about designing intergenerational places and spaces? And the children's contributions to that were absolutely fantastic. And in fact, that brought together the notion of older people and play into that design, thinking about playful environments for older people, just as well or as much as the adults across the whole age range. So, you know, kind of my play is not to say, let's almost forget about age. Let's bring people together on the basis of interests, on meaningful interactions, on, you know, fulfilling purpose, in terms of what we want to do as people, rather than on the basis of our age. So I couldn't agree more. People across the lifespan coming together in joint co-creation and co-development of space and place and of services and community resources. I think that's the way to go. If we don't do that, if we simply design for older people, and especially if we do that without involving them, then we run the risk of the ghettoisation, as Michael said, of older people, and creating old age silos where older people reside in invisibility from the rest of society. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
Thanks so much, Judith. Actually, I'm going to bring Tim in on a related question from Carol Prokopyshin, who says, she says, I'm excited as I look forward to being an older resource asset. What can we do now to create those intergenerational spaces that Judith referred to? Could we have some specific examples that would help? So that's for you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, and Carol. Yeah, you'll always be a resource. I'm sure. Your financial director expertise will never go out of fashion. So Judith has already talked a bit about that, but I think one of the things is when we're creating new housing estates. One of the things that has happened is that we would societies would build new housing estates that were for families, Ma Upon the Wains, and they would become age segregated. And so we need to think differently about how we build community, how we build houses that remain intergenerational. So that would be one thing to think about. And workplaces continue to be intergenerational for the most part. Some industries are much more younger, some are more older, but lots of workplaces remain intergenerational. It's then when people retire that they risk being age segregated. But it is about building those communities that allow people to live in intergenerational settings. So I think Judith has covered a lot of that already, but we need to think then about building new spaces that allow people to live together.
Yeah, thank you. Oops.
Could I maybe just add a little bit to that, because thinking about environmental psychology, and I know someone was asking, to us to talk about or just to reveal what disciplines we come from. So I'm an environmental psychologist by background, and moved into the area of health sciences in order to better understand that intersection between environment and health. So that's where I come from. And one of the things that I think in terms of designing for space and place, which is intergenerational in nature, is the need for thinking about the plasticity of places, that flexibility of design, which can be understood on a psychological level, so that anybody who enters that place can see it in terms of its flexibility and what it offers them, rather than being over-designed so that you design for a specific activity or for a specific population. So this has been very much taken up, for example, in New York, where they've got a very nice example of parkland, which is designed specifically to be flexible, to enable children to play, but not on play equipment. Rather, it's designed in an aesthetic, environmental way, so that climbing is on rocks and up trees and so on, rather than specific play equipment. So the idea there is to design for flexibility. It looks great for older people. You can sit on the rocks, you can climb them, you can do all sorts of things. So the principle of plasticity within the environment is, I think, really important in this intergenerational design.
Thank you so much, Judith. Quite a few questions have suddenly started coming in, so I think we'll have to pick up our pace in replies, colleagues. So there's one here, a very interesting one, I think, from Paula Flanagan. She says, in this pandemic, there's been a lot of language about older people being vulnerable, and it's quite a pejorative word, actually, vulnerable. And she's asking, does this highlight ageism? Is there some opportunity here to promote aging as a valuable stage of our lives? I'm going to ask Miratul to comment on this one first, because you're a clinician. What do you think of the word vulnerable that's been used with respect to COVID-19?
I think, so thank you, Mike. I think great question. I do think that there's been a very lazy use of terminology to describe, millions of people, and not understand that there's really, really rich diversity in people that are over a certain age. And we can't just have this sort of, I think vulnerability is a pejorative term. I mean, I'll keep it brief, but I definitely, as a clinician, never, at a certain point, you stop thinking about somebody's chronological age and you look at them really from a biological age. I mean, I've got patients, I mean, I have a neurology clinic once a week in Ninewells, and it's so often I see somebody that might be in their 50s, but really biologically, very, very, have a lot of disability, frailty. I once remember doing a double take where I had somebody that came in to see my clinic, came in a very smart suit, sat down, we talked for half an hour, and at the point I started to write out a form for his test, it dawned on me that he was 91. And it just almost kind of surprised me because, but again, just consistent with that, Mike, is that, and Paul, I really think that there's a biological aspect to how the aging process affects different people in different ways. So that has to be some ways always considered when making policy decisions, I think.
Great. Thank you, Miratul. I'm going to keep you online in a second as well, because we had a question here which goes back to your points, Miratul. The question is, how has the bias occurred towards cancer and heart disease? After all, we all age, and how can this mindset be altered? It's a question for all of us. I'll start off by saying part of the problem with the way therapeutics are developed, so and its research budgets follow the search for therapeutics to a large extent, has been historically one condition, one pill. And really, we have to stop thinking that way. As Miratul said, look at it more holistically, look at the fundamental underlying pathways. And the medicines of the future shouldn't be one pill for one thing, but one pill for one set of conditions. So I'll bring, but that's a relatively new concept, funnily enough. And it's a relatively new concept because we've only had the science that we need to achieve this through modern molecular genetics for a relatively short space of time. Miratul, would you like to comment further on that?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Mike. Yeah, I would say actually, I think the funding actually is one issue, but I don't think it's actually the full story, and I probably didn't paint it as perhaps maybe what's the reality. Understanding the processes of aging and understanding the basis of these aging diseases has been actually scientifically extremely tough. And I think that the reasons for that has been that we've not, until recently, been able to classify diseases as well. So I'll give two quick examples. If you have, for example, a liver disease, and you go and see your doctor and he says you've got cirrhosis on the basis of a scan, the liver doctor can take do a biopsy, and he can tell you from this biopsy by looking under the microscope exactly what the cirrhosis is due to, whether it was due to a virus that you've been exposed to or maybe an autoimmune condition. For the brain, particularly neurological diseases, aging diseases, we don't routinely use, we don't have any sort of robust method to sample the brain in a way that would give you accurate diagnosis. So the classification of many brain diseases really took a long time. In fact, there was dementia actually up until the 1970s was very poorly understood what the different causes of dementia was. And it was only when we started to be able to classify them better, and even then it's been a clinical classification, not a molecular classification. Now, as Mike mentioned, molecular genetics is changing that. Now somebody can have a brain disease and a gene test that says it's a particular gene, and that can really help start to allow you to dig deeper into the research. So I think there's been a combination of funding, but also the challenge of the brain has been difficult as an organ to really get a handle on. And then finally, I would say that cancers are at the moment can be successfully modeled in different ways. The brain and also some of these aging processes are very complex, and it's hard to make artificial models either in a dish or in a sort of maybe in a sort of an organism that Mike mentioned, or an animal. And that has also limited, breakthroughs in therapies.
Thanks, Miratul. I'm going to move on to a different type of topic now. This was a great question from Francis Travers. Do we know whether advances in technology are promoting or inhibiting integration of older people within wider society? Tim, can I ask you to take a short stab at that, and then Judith?
Yeah, the silver surfers, as they're sometimes called, are one of the fastest growing part of the internet, and I think it probably cuts both ways. That that technology does allow older people to be more engaged with families and friends that may have moved away. So yeah, I think it's the digital divide between younger people and older people. I think is a bit overblown, and there are real benefits for technology in older people. I know that's one of the areas that Judith has studied as well, so she can probably fill in a bit more.
Judith, over to you.
Yeah, in terms of the digital divide, I would totally agree there with you, Tim, that, you know, it's very different and now to what it was, you know, 10, 15 years ago, with very many more older people being much more au fait with technologies. And especially COVID has affected that. That with a lot more older people learning how to use things like Teams and Skype and so on for social connectedness and so on. One of the statistics, or one of the figures actually I'd like to share with you, is that in terms of technology development, from the idea, from a researcher having an idea that about a technology development through to its implementation in the market, the average amount of time for that is 17 years. 17 years. It's absolutely incredible if you look at that. And very many technologies actually die before they become marketable. So they die at the prototype stage, for example, when the funding stops and the research stops. So in order to get technologies much more accessible and to have them make a positive impact on people's lives, I think we need to think about two things. The first thing is that our research projects need to involve the notion of commercialization right from the outset. And the second thing is that we need to have older people participating, and their carers and healthcare professionals and practitioners participating in the research idea as partners in projects, and right through the development of the research and the development of protocols and through into the market. So inclusion, involvement and commercialization are the ways forward, I think, if we're going to see technologies that make a positive difference rather than actually become more difficult for older people.
Thanks, Judith. I'm going to synthesize, because we're running out of time, a bit, two questions together, if I may. One, somebody asks about the impact on pensions if we as we all live longer. Obviously that has an effect on pension funds and so on. And so the real question is, how long should elderly people be involved in the workforce, and what solutions does the panel see for this problem in the future of balancing the books, basically? And then Teresa Lynn asks, what approaches are there to identifying the value of older people as holders of human life experience and cultural knowledge, especially as we enter a world where digital society lacks village communities, inverted commas? So Tim, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, another tough one. That the pensions question is really interesting, and you know, there's a lot of actuarial science and that's behind trying to figure out how we can afford our pensions, and having us work longer is one way to help pensions be affordable. The difficulty with that, though, is because of the social dimensions of health, poor people tend to die younger, so there are real disparity issues around that approach. But that's most countries are looking at that as one way to make pensions more affordable. But again, if you think about the living longer, living healthier, for those people that happens to, then that extending the pension age makes some sense. And the question, Teresa's question around the, I think the more visible that positive images of older people in society will help address that as well.
Thank you very much, Tim. We're approaching the witching hour of 7 p.m. So I'm going to put two questions together just now for Judith. One is so from Isabel and from Iman, and they're both interrelated, I think. How do you think that a society should deal with loneliness in an aging population? And Iman sort of adds, how can the younger generation help to make a change within the community and make older people feel more included in society? So Judith, would you like to take that combo?
Yeah, a really difficult way forward here, I think, through working together on projects. But what we've seen in the past, and I always like to think about the idea about smoking and smoking cessation in relation to this, is that if you tell people to do it, even if you show the health benefits of it, it doesn't happen as much as we'd like. But policy and regulation can really support life changes. And so, when I've looked at policy on housing and policy on dementia and so on, and community development, you very rarely see an intergenerational perspective being positively taken within a policy context. And so I think a more intergenerational lens on every policy that comes out would be really helpful, because that would underpin the need actually to do this, because this is a need, and it's not something that is is a nice thing that we could do if we had the money. So policy imperatives, I think, are really important in this.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to sneak a couple more questions in from an international perspective, which I think is really good. Michael asks, can we learn anything from countries like Japan, who have a much larger proportion of older people? And another question which came in from an anonymous questioner was, how would you target aging societies in developed and developing nations? So obviously Japan, a very developed nation, but I'm going to go to Miratul for that, actually, because I'd just be interested to know, for instance, in neurodegenerative diseases, how do things differ between developed societies like Japan, Europe, versus Southeast Asia and Africa, let's say?
Thank you, Mike. I think that in developing countries, the general, there's no infrastructure at all really for the care aspect. I mean, but setting aside the medical diagnostic side, care aspect, it's very much, I think, left to families to have to sort of organize that themselves. I mean, I have direct experience with my own family. We're originally from Bangladesh. In fact, I was talking to my mother this morning, my parents have emigrated back there. They were describing one of my cousin's husbands, who his mother's not very well. She hasn't got a degenerative disease, but she's quite frail. And he will go, he doesn't live far, but he will spend 3 days a week with her, giving her not just sort of help, but just social enrichment. There isn't really any system of care homes, residential homes. Now, I think that the way that these societies, these developing countries are improving economically, and there's a burgeoning middle class, I think there will be, for an entrepreneur, opportunities there to, for example, push the envelope and think that maybe very high quality nursing home type of care is relevant for people with neurodegenerative disorders, because you need specialized nursing and caring. That doesn't really exist, as far as I know, in places like Bangladesh. I'm not probably in Africa. I think Japan's probably very similar, Mike, to here, because I think in Japan, with small families and often living away from elderly, there isn't that sort of family network. So, but yeah, Thank you.
Thank you, Miratul. And I think we are out of time, ladies and gentlemen. I do apologise for there were a few questions there that I couldn't get to in time, and it wasn't because there were any less interesting questions. It was literally just the clock was against us. So I do apologise to anybody who didn't have their questions answered. I'd like to thank Professor Tim Kelly, Professor Judy Six Smith, and Professor Miratul Muqit for coming along to give their short presentations and to answer your questions. I do hope you've enjoyed tonight's event, and I hope that we'll see you at many more University of Dundee Saturday evening lectures. So signing off for now. Thank you all very much.